The worst economic downturn since the Great Depression. That is the forecast of the International Monetary Fund on the global growth in the wake of the coronavirus pandemic. In this twice-a-year World Economic Outlook, the IMF predicts the world economy will shrink sharply by 3% this year and has warned that advanced economies could be the hardest hit. Meanwhile, China and India are two of the few major economies forecast to register positive growth. How should we interpret these projections? What needs to be done to salvage the global economy, and how important is global coordination? To discuss these issues and more, I'm pleased to be joined by Yao Yang, Director of the China Center for Economic Research at Peking University, Steve Keen, crowd-funded Professor of Economics on Patreon, and Ryan Patel, Senior Fellow at the Drucker School of Management at Claremont Graduate University. This is Dialogue. I'm Wang Guan. All right, Steve, I want to go to you first. Negative 3% growth rate. The IMF also said that we're living in an era of great lockdown. The magnitude and speed of collapse in activity, quote unquote, is unlike anything experienced in our lifetimes. What do you make of their statement and also their projections?
Well, the projection, I think, is extremely conservative. I think if the 3% fall in GDP would be a ridiculously good outcome. We're more likely to see something of the order of 10% of GDP. And yes, they're right about it being unprecedented. There is nothing like this in the history of human society in terms of its impact upon production and demand at the same time. And we're also carrying a level of private debt which is 3 times the level we had back at the time of the last pandemic, the Spanish flu. So it is going to have an incredible impact upon our production systems, our economy, and the viability of our social systems after the crisis.
So you said you would rather think that there would be a 10% negative growth. I know that you predicted the Great Recession of 2008 when it was in the early 90s. How bad do you think this upcoming economic downturn will be, and what are your predictions this time around?
Oh, there's no comparison between the two. The last one was caused by the financial sector crippling the real economy by putting far too much debt on it, and then when the greater growth of debt stopped, so did demand, and the economy plunged for that reason. This is totally different, but it's occurring in the aftermath. We still haven't solved the problem from 2008 of far too much private debt. So I think the only way we can take a look at this is capitalism has gone into a coma. And in that situation, the hospital effectively is the government sector, and it has to provide the cash flow, rather like the plasma in that sense, to enable capitalism to continue functioning. If we don't have the government providing money that enables renters to pay rent, mortgagees to pay their mortgages, and the debt to be serviced by corporations, then we'll have the destroyed financial system after this crisis, as well as the huge damage to human health in the meantime. So it's far greater as a challenge, and it's about time we threw out the childish notions of neoclassical economics, which led us into the crisis in 2008 and have left it in its remnants afterwards. It was no more time for childish ideas about how the economy functions.
All right, points taken. Ryan, I want to go to you. You know, some folks are comparing the ongoing crisis to the Great Depression back in the 1920s, and I want to show you this Twitter user's comment. I think we'll have it right here by the name of Carrie Bower. This friend said, when I was 12, my grandpa, a lifelong Republican, told me that there could and never would be another Great Depression because of the reforms enacted by FDR. Even at 12 in the mid-1990s, boom, I thought that was an overly optimistic comment. What do you think? Are the two crises comparable?
Well, no. I mean, for the time we see how intertwined we are as an economy and globally, it's far different from the 20s. And on top of that, you know, with the history over the last decade of where we are going to and where we are going forward, it's really very interesting to see how people react to it. You know, you talk about the Republican Party and the Democratic Party, policies have changed far along, and we also haven't seen this pandemic of really taking not just a region, obviously talking about a global pandemic, being able to really cause havoc. And part of the reason, too, behind this pandemic is really different for businesses is that they can't with the lockdown, there is no forecast of when they're coming back at, especially in the U.S. There's only estimates. And say we can take an educated guess that maybe businesses and back to whatever normal looks like is 2 to 3 months. The other question becomes consumer confidence. How does that spending go back into the U.S. or into the other markets to be able to get this thing to go back forward? And unfortunately, in this case, there isn't an on and off switch, and it's going to take a lot more togetherness, not just from one country, from multiple countries, to get everybody out of this.
Well, Ryan, there has been a debate, between saving lives versus saving the economy. But the IMF Managing Director Kristalina Georgieva has said that this is a false dilemma, and that in a pandemic, defeating the virus and defending people's health are necessary for economic recovery. Would you agree? What would you add to that?
Well, I'd first think it's always about people first. Where the economy question becomes, there's two camps. One is open it up so everyone can get their livelihood back. Two, the other camp, which I think is the camp you start to see in Europe, and I would hope that the U.S. is following, is if you choose to open up, because I don't think anyone can be locked down for another 3-4 months without really devastation to the economy and to people's household, is making it in measures, and taking steps and ensuring people's health are first. And I think with that, that's the scary part of reopening the economy a little bit too early without this health precaution in there. So I'm the believer of, if you're going to choose to open, you've got to be able not to reopen really quickly and be able to get the essential needs in there with the health precautions. But the key is, for each country, is to ensure citizens follow that. Otherwise, we're going to be back into this kind of lockdown again, which I'm not sure that you can have many jolts like this for businesses and unemployment to be able to be that high.
Well, Dr. Yao, I would like to go to you. Let's go back to the IMF's World Economic Outlook forecast. It says the U.S. economy will contract by nearly 6% and the Eurozone by 7%, whereas China and India will register positive growth of a mere 1.2% and 1.9% respectively. Why the difference? I mean, what do you make of that?
Probably IMF made the forecast because China and India have been hit less severely than Western countries, right? So, for example, in India, the number of infections is still relatively low today. In China, the infection was very severe in the very beginning, but it was confined mainly to Wuhan. Other cities were shut down for a period of time, but quickly other cities were reopened. Right now, only Beijing and Wuhan still have some lockdown measures, but other cities are being opened up. So I think that's the base for IMF to make a relatively positive forecast for China and India. But I have to make a very cautious point here. First, for China, the economic activities have not been resuming as fast as we want to see. Right? So consumption is still very low, and the investment, we still need time to see it to rise up. So probably we still need, 1 month, 2 months to see the Chinese economy to go back to its older track. As for India, we really don't know the real situation over there because it's still in the process of the pandemic. Right? So we really don't know the direction, the situation.
Well, Dr. Yao, talking about China's economy, as you mentioned, China's economy is taking a hit, and resumption of work is going slowly. That's why China's central bank said it will lower the reserve requirement ratio for small and medium-sized banks by 1 percentage point. Why target those banks, and how do you expect these measures to work?
Well, in China, we have big banks, we have smaller banks. Smaller banks mainly serve SMEs, right? Because they are small, they don't have capacity to serve those big companies. So mostly they serve SMEs. So I think the central bank's target policy is the best policy to deal with SME finance. And in this period of time, SMEs have been hit the most, and they really need help from the government. And this is definitely a good move.
But it's not just about the Chinese economy right now, right? China's trade numbers are down. The Europeans and the Americans are coping with their outbreaks. You know, trade, after all, still is a big part of China's overall GDP.
Yeah, you know, the most recent export-import data have been released. Actually, they have been a little better than people have expected, right? So export still down on year base, but actually the negative growth was smaller than in February. But I still want to be cautious about numbers because you know, Western countries have been only locked down last month. So that's going to make Chinese companies to lose a lot of orders. So in the future 2 or 3 months, probably we are going to see more decline of export.
All right, you're watching Dialogue, and we'll be back right after this. Welcome back. So, Ryan, I would like to go to you. How effective will conventional monetary and fiscal stimulus be this time around, in your opinion, in stopping the global downturn? I mean, if the pandemic persists and quarantine lockdown orders remain in place, it's just that harder, I mean, for the conventional policy mix to get economies going again, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think the problem is, you know, how do you kind of get people to start spending more money and investing things again, right? That is the crux of this whole issue. And when there is lack of clarity, one, that you don't know if, for example, the vaccine or not, and getting workers and safety out there. Two, it isn't clear right now. I mean, everybody's trying to catch up, and you kind of feel like, you know, people talk about the new normal. Let me tell you one thing. Whatever you were doing business, the way you were doing business maybe 6 months ago, and how trade you were doing business is changing. It will change going forward, right? Because when all these different economies are devastated and are disrupted, you know, different countries will have different needs, and you're starting to see that even with just masks of, you know, how you know, taking, you know, in the U.S. be able to take all those things and need that mask perspective coming from all over the world in production. So there is that disruption in that degree, and it's really hard to kind of put a number behind, you know, the economies. But, you know, I think what's going to be really important is the regional play, the regional pull for each region, and how to get everyone back on their feet in the economy-wise. That'll be a lot more. I'm going to be watching that to be able to lift each other up a little more quicker.
Well, Ryan, talking about the U.S. economy, more than 17 million Americans have lost their jobs, or rather have you know, filed for unemployment benefits in the past 3 weeks. By some estimates, the unemployment level has reached 16%, higher than at any time since the Great Depression. How do you think this will impact the U.S. economy?
Drastically. You're seeing what the U.S. administration is trying to do with all these stimulus packages to try to keep everybody at bay. I mean, the U.S. economy, a third of it is the gig economy. It's gig workers. You know, 20 million jobs in the last decade that was added, all swiped, all deleted in about 3 weeks. And that is worrisome because what do you do next? And you can't, there is no policy, you know, we were talking about policy, what typical policy, what U.S. policy has done in these situations. Well, they've never had a third gig economy ever, workers to be able to deal with. And we have never seen it be intertwined globally for the U.S. market. So what the stopgap is and what the U.S. needs to do, and I think they're trying to do it, but it'll be determined, are they actually making a dent? Is everyone still afloat? A lot of companies are furloughing their employees, hoping 60 days is the magical answer to get everyone back to work. But you know, that will be determined. And you know, you look at Michigan, for example, in the United States, they're the number 3 above New York. they've lost the most unemployment as well. So it's not just the New York and LA, it's these middle states that are hurting as well, and that's hard to kind of turn the button back on to get jobs going.
Right, but what's making things worse, as many believe, is the politicization surrounding the COVID-19. Dr. Yao, I want to go to you for that. Many U.S. politicians, including Senator Marco Rubio, are pushing for legislation to reduce America's reliance on the Chinese supply of what the U.S. considers strategically important goods, like face masks, Ryan has mentioned. Do you think this is just talk, or could, rearranging global supply chains become a reality?
Well, to me, I think that's more political rhetoric than real. The International Division of Labor has been formed in the last 20, 30 years, and there's a reason behind it. That is specialization, right? Every company is just making a specific part of a big thing, right? And every company has raised their sophistication in making things. It's very difficult for other companies to compete, right? So let me be specific. Think about the electric car, Tesla, right? So Tesla has opened a factory in Shanghai, and the Tesla wants to serve the Chinese market. Can we imagine Tesla stays? I think that's very, very difficult, right? First thing, China still has a huge market. And second thing, China still has productive cost advantage over production in the United States. That's all because the efficiency of China's production network.
All right, Ryan, I want to get your take on U.S. politicians' threat of, economic sanctions against Huawei recently, and then the cutting off of supply chains, making them in the United States. What do you make of those threats of rearranging global supply chains?
Well, if you take what the past action for the Trump administration has done over the past year with U.S. and China trade, if you take out the Twitter and the rhetoric, it's clear that the U.S. and China needed each other, right? Let's just be really clear about it. Otherwise, there would have been no kind of truce. And so if you take that rhetoric and you put that into where we're sitting as an economy, the U.S. as right now, I would highly doubt that you would have more self-inflicted pain by not trading with a partner that gets you the best cost right now. So if the rhetoric is maybe long-term, okay, fine. But, I mean, I'm not really buying it yet. I think they're just political positioning for an election year in November, because you and I both know that Donald Trump has run on two things. Specifically is the economy, which is not sitting pretty right now for him, and his relationship against the globe of where it's the America first. And so you're seeing this kind of pitch through behind this, and you were mentioning about supply chain. I mean, this is not a new question, right? This question was last year, 2 years ago. Has the U.S. traded with other partners? Has companies really moved in other places? And again, this is not the right time? And if you haven't changed supply chains now, if you're a company or as a policy, this is probably not the best time to doing it.
All right. On April 12th, we know that Saudi Arabia and Russia struck a deal to cut oil production in an attempt by OPEC to prevent oil prices from crashing any further, but the prices are still falling, and that is generating comments online. For example, this friend by the name of Andrew Aziz said, oil price dropped below $20 today, down again after hours. Don't be surprised if next time you fill up a tank for free, you got a Whole Foods gift card included. Sounds tempting to me. I mean, I just left the United States, unfortunately, a few months ago. Ryan, what do you make of that comment?
Are you going to give me the Whole Foods gift card? Because I'll go fill up right now, because it is dropping. I think here's the sad reality behind this. What's going to happen in the oil market? Oil companies are going to go out of business. There's going to be companies that are not going to make this through, and you're going to see a consolidation piece. Obviously, the oil prices dropping is a good thing for the consumer. and hopefully that is, we typically see it here in the United States. Fourth quarter in the holiday season, when there's a lot of spending, we see the oil prices tend to be lower and gets people to kind of go out and spend. So that'll be interesting to play while this lines up. But this definitely is not good news for the oil. For the oil markets, and even from an international relation perspective, because this was really tense. This was kind of a standoff between those two countries, and obviously with the U.S. being able to voicing their opinion as well.
Well, Steve, sorry to have lost you, but I want to go to our earlier topic of the economic rescue plans, how that may or may not work against this. The economic fallout from this current COVID-19 pandemic. Do you think the conventional policy mix of monetary and fiscal stimulus would be enough to salvage the global economy this time around?
No, I don't. Nothing like it. This is beyond anything else. Capitalism has never been forced to shut down for 6 weeks. And that's, if we'd actually done a very sensible approach to this virus, it could have been knocked off with a 6-week shutdown. But there's no way that capitalism is set up for people's cash flows to terminate for 6 weeks and then restart easily on the other side. So the only way it can be done is by the state creating the money that's necessary to enable all the normal payments to be maintained while the incomes that normally finance those payments are not maintained. Now, if that's not done, we're going to have an enormous residue of financial damage to people, to corporations, to landlords, to tenants, which will wash through and cause chaos well after the coronavirus has been defeated, if we can ever look forward to that. So there's no way that conventional policy is enough. This is why myself and several of my colleagues have been championing what we call a modern debt jubilee, to use the state's money creation capacity to give a per capita injection to people across the spectrum to enable those cash flows to be maintained while the incomes behind them have been terminated by the coronavirus.
But Steve, let's look at the United States. I mean, in terms of the relationship between the central government and the state government, the White House cannot even order the states to have their economies reopened.
Yes, I know, and this is showing that our political systems aren't set up to fight something like this virus. We have always had a non-biological approach to our economic policy and economic theory, and we're now seeing the costs of that approach. We are a biological species on a biological planet, and the coronavirus couldn't give a damn about capitalism or socialism or fascism or anything else. It just wants to move from one host to another. Unless we think about this in a biological way, it will defeat us. And this is letting us know that everything we've done, the entire political system, is not set up to fight this crisis, and we can't afford not to be set up for it. And this is only the first of a whole range of crises coming our way, courtesy of the pressure humans are putting on this planet.
All right, so let's talk about what needs to be done, because this is really key. Countries need to come together. Okay, Dr. Yao, what types of coordination, international coordination, is needed right now to cope with the economic fallout from the COVID-19?
Well, first thing is I think cooperation now is very difficult because President Trump doesn't want to cooperate with other countries. The United States just announced is going to withdraw funding to WHO. That's really a bad move. So I don't think any real international cooperation can be done between major countries. But I still want to say that some international coordinations are very important. First, international community has to be mobilized to take care of developing countries. In developing countries, the pandemic is just the beginning. It's going to get worse. And in those countries, it's going to be very, very difficult for them to contain the spread of virus and also to avoid massive deaths. Right? I think advanced countries and also China have to work together to prevent such disaster happening in developing countries. And second, in terms of restart the economy, I think countries can work together to have some coordination. I mean, this unlimited QE done by American Fed, to me, is a bad idea. it's not going to help the economy because the money does not go to people who need money, just like I said. Right? People need money, and a better way is just to give money to people so they can spend. Unlimited QE is just helping Wall Street again. Wall Street is going to get more out of the economy. It's going to be a massive, massive redistribution of wealth and income in the United States. That's really a bad direction. And the same thing on China. We love investment, but this time probably we should give money directly to people, so people have money to spend. That's the most important thing. We have to restart consumption globally.
So Ryan, what types of coordination and cooperation are needed right now to cope with the economic consequences of the COVID?
Well, from the U.S. perspective, as the professor said, it really needs leadership. I mean, I hate to say it, though, that's leadership to get everyone to come together. That's the only way you're going to be able to do this. And I think first and foremost, you got to get your own house in order and be able to be clear. The announcement is a little bit disappointing of the funding of the U.S., like mentioned, of not who, but I think it's more than this. It's bigger than this. How do you avoid this happening again for the future? I mean, that's one conversation that's not in the mix right now because we're still in the middle of one pandemic, but there will be, unfortunately, something else in the future. It could be something else that grabs everyone that comes together, and this is the time right now for, I would hope to see the largest economies come in the world to come put plans together so the emerging markets won't get hit. Who knows the next time that might be the case. So right now it feels like everyone's running around doing their own thing, and I think we should be taking lessons learned from Asia, from the U.S. and Europe, and come together and go, what was the best outcomes of all this versus just kind of pushing it out to the side and saying, let's go back to normal.
Steve, finally, I would like to go to you. Your final thoughts on the current economic downturn?
It's potentially capable of destroying society, and the only society which is showing resilience in the face of this are ones with strong central states and an acceptance of a role for the state in situations like this. So it may bring to an end the ideology that has promoted the free market over a mix of a government and state system. And that may be beneficial, but it can be extremely painful for the countries of America and Europe. And I think this may well be a case where this is the end, the absolute serious end of the dominance of the global West.
Well, you talk about the emergence of, rather the end of neoclassical economic theories and models, but the fact of the matter is we saw emergence of populism and nationalism, right-wing parties across Europe and in the United States.
Yes, and these have been promoted by all the naive attempts to push it into a pure free market system and reduce the role of the government. The whole idea that austerity was necessary, the whole idea that the government has to tax in order to spend is simply wrong. It's part of both neoliberal ideology and also conventional neoclassical economics. We're now seeing the damage this does, and it's been thrown out the window straight away. For example, the Bank of England is now directly funding the Treasury in England to enable it to make the payments that are necessary, though still nowhere near enough. So we're seeing the textbook economic model is the most dangerous thing capitalism faces, up to and including potentially the coronavirus itself.
Alrighty. I want to thank all of my guests for today. Dr. Yao Yang, Director, China Center for Economic Research at Peking University. Also Steve King, crowd-funded Professor of Economics on Patreon. And last but not least, Ryan Patel, Senior Fellow at Claremont Graduate University. And that will do it for this edition of Dialogue. Thank you so much for tuning in. I'm Wang Guan.